I finally finished my college application, so now let's take a look at why Dehancer is one of the best tools for color grading footage from the Canon EOS app. Okay, so that montage you just watched was shot entirely on this small, amazing camera, the Canon EOS M, running Magic Lantern, which allows me to shoot video. They say that this camera already has a filmic quality to it because of its auto sensor and ability to adapt to vintage lenses. However, that's only improved by the film emulation of Dehancer. So let's take a look at DaVinci and see what I did to make that montage happen. Oh, and by the way, Dehancer isn't sponsoring this video and they're not paying me. But to be fully transparent, I am receiving a license of their product in exchange for this video. One of the first things I want to suggest to people is just to have your video fully edited. So you want to have everything timed out. I have here with music and sound effects and everything, so that when I play back, I'm not getting any choppiness. As you can see, cutting between even just the simple cut like that. I think it's definitely something you can work around, either just by deactivating when you edit or by editing your video first. Okay, so let's just start with this first clip here. So how Dehancer works is it works in the color tab of DaVinci Resolve, and all you need to do is simply add a new node, and then using your effects here tab, you scroll all the way to the bottom and you scroll and you just import Dehancer Pro or whatever version of Dehancer you have onto that node. So I'm just going to run through all of my settings for this clip. So without any of my nodes here, this is what my image is looking like. This is straight out of camera, exported from the MOV app in Rec 709. Obviously, this doesn't look like a very good image. Just so you know, for my Canon EOS M shooters, I'm shooting at dual ISO 100/800 in the 1080p mode. We do get dual ISO, which allows me to bring out a lot more shadow detail from the hair and the face to get the look I'm going for. But most of the magic happening is happening here in Dehancer. So the first tab here, you have input, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's just how you input your footage. Personally, I just use Rec 709. However, you can do different logs. If you have an Arri or you have a Sony or a Lumix, they have a whole bunch of different cameras in there. Then you have some pretty basic functionality here: exposure compensation, temperature compensation, tint compensation, and defringing. All I did for this clip was just make it a little bit cooler to -5 here, because I already got my exposure looking how I want it in these other two nodes. Next is the whole point of Dehancer, which is the film emulations. And they have a lot of different film emulations. Some of them, like the one I'm using for a lot of these clips, Kodak Vision 3 250D, is a very iconic motion picture film stock they use in a lot of films. It's daylight balanced, it's not super grainy, it's just a great film stock. However, they also have ones that are more experimental or more still photography based, so they basically have a look for everybody. Other ones from Kodak, they want some Fujifilm, from Agfa, from Cinestill. They have so many different options, but for this I really like the Kodak Vision 3 250D, and of course you can also push and pull each of these. And another one of the few features about Dehancer is your ability to enable and disable basically everything. This might seem pretty basic and straightforward, but it's actually really helpful. If all you want Dehancer for is the grain, you can turn off everything except for the film grain. You can just get the film grain. The next function is film developer. So obviously when you shoot film, it has to be developed. I've shot film and I've developed some film at home, not motion picture film, but still photography film. And it can be a stressful process, but obviously this is a lot simpler. It's just clicking some buttons here. All I did for this specific clip was increase the contrast, which is something you can do during developing, is you can kind of control how much contrast you have. So see, this is just a bit of a flatter image when I don't have that contrast enabled, but when I give it a little bit of a boost, it gives me a more dynamic image. But you can also change other things like gamma correction here, color separation, or you can give it a little bit of a color boost, kind of like saturation. And film, naturally, when you shoot it, is a bit more compressed, right? There's not as much sometimes dynamic range, and you won't see the darkest of blacks and the whitest of whites. in an image. So this kind of allows you to enable that white as it just kind of compresses the image. You can see here the background, how it changes. But personally for this clip, I didn't like that. I just disabled it because I liked how it was looking without that. Next is expand, which really helps you get your highlights and your blacks to a point that you want. It just helps you can kind of crush your blacks there. You can see what's happening to my model's hair here versus the white point white. So that's helpful if you want that. Personally for this clip, I didn't need it, but this is helpful, to help bring back some highlights in, let's say if you're shooting through a window. Next is print. So film has to be printed to be presented like at a theater. So there's different kind of print films here that Dehancer gets you. At basic, they just have linear, but I really like the Kodak 2383 print film. For this, I really needed to increase the target white because without it, it wasn't really giving me the white that I was looking for in the background. It wasn't really a true white. And this isn't exactly a true white either, but it's more natural to what I'm looking for. Personally, these are the settings I liked, but again, you just need to play around with it for each individual clip. The next setting is called color head. This allows you to add, or I guess remove, a color cast to your image. Personally, for this clip, I didn't need to do anything, but it's really cool. Obviously, you can make it blue or yellow or do all sorts of crazy things. This is helpful if you're maybe even shooting black and white and you're not getting a true black and white. You might need to play with these settings a bit so that what you're getting is, a true black and white, if that's what you want. And you can also change it individually for the shadows, midtones, and highlights. Also really helpful. You can see how that shifts the image there. Next is kind of where we're getting to the really fun stuff, the stuff that people get really excited about. And this is what Dehancer is really good at. So starting here with film grain, they have a lot of different options here that you can choose from. Obviously depending on the size of your negative you're shooting, 8mm versus 16 versus 35 versus 65 is all gonna have different film grain along with the different ISOs of each film stock. And also you can customize it. Personally, I just like the default that they had and then I lowered a bit. At default, it was 35, which was just a bit too grainy for my look. This is kind of going for kind of more commercial makeup look. So this isn't really what I was going for. So I lowered it to about 15 because I felt that that was better. Next is halation, which is kind of like glow around, specular highlights and different images when shooting film. You won't see it a lot in this image, but if you're shooting things like neon lights or something like that, neon signs, it's a lot more noticeable. For this, I just kept it at the default because it added a little bit. You can see what it did to my model's skin here. It just made the skin pop a little bit and added a little bit to that. It's subtle, but I think it makes an important difference. Next is bloom, which kind of appeals when there's a lot of light in an image and it kind of adds a bit of blurriness, a bit of softness around those edges. Again, it's not super noticeable in an image like this. You can kind of see it a little bit there in the hair, disabled versus enabled. It's very subtle, but I just kept it at the default because I felt that Dehancer did a good job with that. Next is film damage, which is kind of adding little effects and particles over your image. So at default, there was definitely a bit too much for my liking. You see all of that. And since I'm going for kind of a commercial look, I didn't really like that. But by subtracting a bit to -40, that's where I got a look that I was going for. Very subtle, but still noticeable. Next is film breath, which is kind of self-explanatory. So when you shoot film, there's often isn't perfect exposure between frames. There's kind of little changes with shutter speed or micro changes that change the exposure over a shot. Again, it's not super noticeable. I think that Dehancer does a good job with it, but for this shot, I'm not really going for that. I'm not going for a super, exact replica of what film looks like, so I don't really need it for this clip. Similar with gate weave. So gate weave is kind of, you'll notice it often with title cards more than with actual footage. It's when the frame kind of almost moves a little bit, just slightly shaky. Originally it's 100, you can see how it cropped on an image, versus at 40, I'm kind of getting a less crop and it's a lot more subtle. These features are subtle, but they are important if you're going for that exact replica. Next is Overscan. Obviously there was a border around film naturally, so this kind of gives you that look. I really like this Ultra Panavision 65mm one. Again, it's not really my thing, especially for this shot, but I think it could be really helpful for transitions and things like that. I'll kind of go through and show you the different ones they have. They're really cool, really accurate, and you can play around with so many different features of them. But for this specific shot, I'm not going for that. Next is Vignette, which happens with auto lenses and film cameras, where you kind of have darker around the edges, as you can kind of see here. Again, for this shot, I'm not going for that. I just want a pure image without much of a vignette. Lastly, we have one of my favorite features of Dehancer, and one you can actually download for free. It's false color and clipping indication. So if anything in this image was clipping, it would show me. You can also see here from the scopes that doesn't really look like much is clipping, but false color is really helpful, and I'll show you why. Essentially, it's giving a different color to different values. This is kind of how, you know, cinematographers or photographers, you can kind of see with the zone system, right? So this red here is the brightest part of the image, and then the orange, and then the yellow, right? So this might not seem super helpful, but it is really helpful when you want to match two shots, right? So I have this shot and this shot, which are basically the same scene. So I will use false color to make sure that on their face is similar tones, right? So that I am getting a similar look between these two shots. Because, you know, you might just copy and paste these settings over from one to the other, but there still might be slight differences. So using false colors allows you to see that and not just use guesswork. Because I'm literally seeing, okay, we have this kind of pinkish salmon color here on the face with a little bit of white there, and then here we get the same thing in a similar spot. So that's really helpful. And again, it's free, so I really suggest downloading that. Even if you don't need all the other tools of Dehancer, it's helpful just for general color grading. Lastly, we have output. So this changes obviously the overall output. At 0, obviously we have none, at 100 we have 4. And my suggestion, at least for my work, is I don't really like it at 100. I like lowering it just a bit. Around 80 or so is where I find it to be kind of the sweet spot. Again, it's never going to be perfect, and you have to play around with it. I just find that sometimes 100 is a bit too strong, especially for this shot. So playing around with it at 80, I think gives me a more accurate look in what I'm going for. You can also create LUTs from your settings that you've made, as well as you can change some of your settings like the quality and check your license and tools and things like that. All right, so the next shot I want to look at is this one here. One of the black and white shots. I haven't seen a lot of videos talking about Dehancer's black and white film emulations, but I think they do a really good job. For this, I'm using the Kodak Eastman, again, a really, really popular black and white motion picture stock. They also have other good ones. Ilford HP5, they don't make that in motion picture film anymore. They just do, you know, 35, 120, 4x5, and 8x10, I believe. But Kodak Eastman was really, really popular, and I believe still is, for motion picture black and white. One thing you do need to look out for is saturation. When you kind of play with this, you know, you might not get a true black and white image, right? It's kind of, obviously you can see there's a little bit of a tint to it, right? So you can kind of play with saturation here, depending on how you want it. Or you can do it earlier here, right, in these HDR reels, or just in the reels here. If you want a super accurate film emulation, definitely do your research and spend more time doing it. For me, I just wanted a really quick black and white image that I thought would look good, and easier just to turn the saturation all the way down and not have to worry about it. For this specific shot, I liked a bit more grain, and I think the grain looks really good in the black and white. Again, see how they do an excellent job with the grain here. Instead of being a really simple overlay, that's not actually how it works, right? Film grain is not universal. When I've shot film like HP5 or, you know, Gold 200, it's not just, the grain is not noticeable over the entire image. The amount of light on a part of an image kind of dictates how much grain there is. We can kind of see the most amount of grain here on my model's face, but see in the shadows here on the super white highlights, you don't really notice grain because that's just how an image looks. So Dehancer does a really good job of making that and making it realistic instead of just being a simple overlay. So looking at the bloom here, this is where you can really notice it. So see it on my model's face there. We can kind of see how it kind of blows that and kind of adds just a little bit. It isn't super noticeable, you know, at 100, it's probably a bit overbearing for my liking, but just keeping it at the default value of 50 just adds a little bit to the image, and I think just helps to sell it and just gives it just a little bit more emphasis and punch and beauty that I think wasn't there before. Next, let's look at the still life here. So this is one, you know, maybe we can play around with the different films. So by default, I just did this 250D. This is shot with an old Canon vintage lens that I really like. This 8-ox color implosion. This looks really cool, right? A totally different look than the 250D. This is super kind of flat and kind of without color, or they have Lomachrome purple. Like, this is such an interesting look, right, compared to what we were getting before. And that's what I like. They have the really classic kind of standard film stocks that you would want, but they also have some really interesting ones that kind of play a bit and can get you really creative. And you might not use them all the time, obviously, but they give you different options, which I really, really like. Let's look at this image here. We can kind of see how the expand works, right? So this is what the image looked like without any edits. I brought up the shadows here again, shooting dual ISO. And then again here with the expand, we can kind of see what this does, right? So this image to me looks a bit flat. Obviously we want detail, but it just kind of, it looks like a flat image. So by enabling, expand, by crushing the blacks a little bit, we just get a more dynamic image. Again, you're losing detail, and we have some weird artifacting here because of, that Canon EOS M isn't the best camera in the world. Same thing with this here, right? We kind of, without the expand, we're getting a kind of flatter image, but by, enabling that, we can kind of outplay with it, again, and you can play with how much light you want coming through the window. So what I like about Dehancer is just how simple and efficient it is. I think that color grading can be really complicated for new people, including myself, and just DaVinci is overwhelming, but what I like about Dehancer is that it's really simple and it's straightforward, and it's really easy to get a good looking image out of it very quickly. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't advanced features for more advanced users. You can customize basically everything. So if you are more advanced, it's still a good option. I don't want to go overboard, and I'm not looking for a super exact film replica look. I'm just looking to make my image look better. Okay, bye. Boo! Okay, so really fast, I want to talk about the Dehancer app. It was really cool if you like to shoot photos or videos on your phone. My favorite thing to do with my phone is take panoramas because I think Apple does a really good job. So basically, the Dehancer app is really cool. It's really simple, much like the desktop version is. You have so many different presets here to choose from based on popular film stocks. We can take a look at one. One I was playing with earlier that was really cool was this slow monochrome purple. As you can see, just totally changes the image. It's really easy to play with zoom in. But they also have more subtle film stocks. HP5 here, this is a iconic black and white stock. They also have some Kodak film stocks, Portra 400, amazing looking, so beautiful, and it does a really good job of emulating that even on an iPhone photo. And of course, because it's Dehancer, you can edit things even more, changing all of the different film stocks they have, changing the developer, really easy to crop, changing print skirt, overscan. It's basically like the desktop version, but on your phone, really easy to make good looking images quickly for Instagram or whatever else you want, and you can see how it looks. So good job, Dehancer. Okay, bye, for real now.